Hello, everyone. Welcome to eLearnChat, where talk, it's knowledge. Today I'm joined by our chatty little co-host, Dawn J. Mahoney. Hey, Dawn, how are you today?
I'm pretty good.
You like being chatty, don't you?
I don't know. I can't decide. But it's always a surprise, whatever you say.
I keep you on your toes.
That's right. That's right.
Well,
Welcome to eLearnChat, my friend.
Yes, and we've got with us today, I'd like you to do the honor.
Oh, okay. I'd love to introduce my friend Ajay. Ajay Pangarkar. I didn't say it right again, rats. But anyway, he's head of Team Dawn. He's my head cheerleader, and I'm so glad you're with us today.
And thank you, Don. I appreciate it. Thank you, Rick. I'm really happy to be here with you guys.
Yeah, pleasure.
It all worked out. We are a month later than we had planned, so this is perfect.
Now,
You know what they say, Don, better late than never.
That's true.
That's
and
right.
Ajay is coming from Montreal, Canada today,
Yep, I sure am.
in keeping with our international flavor of the week. So
Your,
anyway, Ajay,
your Canadian cousins up north.
that's right. I love Canada. Well, for a long time, we had actually a condo up in Canada, so up in Vancouver, and we've been thinking about maybe doing that again one of these days. It's just, I love Canada. The people are nice and country's nice.
Absolutely.
Well, Ajay, you are, I guess, a learning strategist, and you do other things. Tell us a little bit about what you do.
Okay, well, I'm what I would call a performance strategist, more or less, and I like to specialize around the employee performance aspect of it. And my specialty in the learning and performance field, I guess, as Don has sort of learned over the years, is I like to look a little bit at the business and performance and strategy side of learning and performance. And because everybody talks about the learning, and while I appreciate that that's what we're here for, and that we are learning professionals to create great courses and be able to transfer skills and knowledge to other people, what we often forget is, or we get siloed in, is understanding the business and performance element for the organization and the reason we exist within the organization. And specifically, that's what I do. I've been writing about it for years, and have written 3 books and related to the topic, the last one being the Trainer's Balance Scorecard. And so that's really my focus, and I try to do that very well. So if anybody follows me in my writings and the stuff that I do, that's really the focus around the aligning learning to performance and business strategy.
Which is something that's actually sorely missing in the industry.
Yeah, I think, Rick and Don, we forget, well, let's start out. Let me back up a step here. One is that we are hired for our expertise in learning. We're hired to develop a way to transfer skills and knowledge to other people within the organization. And granted, let's not take that away from the great people that work in this field. I really get accused sometimes for stepping on those toes, and I really don't want to. That's the reason that people are hired. However, we also tend to get too siloed in it. We forget that we are a business unit within a business. And we have to keep in mind that while learning is a noble aspect, for business leaders, learning is just another business activity, and hence a cost allocation, or quote unquote, I better be careful how I say this, an investment in the business to move it forward and to achieve certain objective. And we often forget that element and get clouded within just the learning part of it.
Yeah, a lot of companies feel that learning is just a cost. They don't see the benefit of learning, and in some cases probably justified. In others, they don't understand what learning does or how it applies to what the bottom line is. And that's something I think everybody struggles with. I come from an IT background, and I've been in learning for over 20 years, but my background originally was over 20 years in IT. And it's a different mindset. In IT, they don't consider you a cost center because you run everything. In learning, they see you as, well, do you know our business? And if you don't, that becomes the issue.
Well, you see, I come from an accounting background. You might be from IT. My background is in finance and accounting, and then I sort of fell, like many of us in learning performance, I like to lovingly say, fell backwards into learning. And I do enjoy it immensely. Don't get me wrong. I love being in this field, and I meet a lot of great people. But that finance and accounting side of me tells me, look, there's nothing wrong being called a cost center. If I could allow me to explain this, in business, and I don't want to get too academic about this, but business leaders learn one thing. They learn that there are investment centers, there are profit centers, and there are cost centers. And for some reason, when you get called a cost center, it's almost like a four-letter word to learning and performance people, because
sometimes our leaders think that way, so that's true.
well, yeah, but there's nothing wrong with it, because the leaders think that way because in an accounting finance context and decision-making context, they have to think that way. Learning is never meant to be a profit-driven activity. It's meant to be a cost to the organization, and cost is not a bad word. It's just a matter of how they look at it. The problem is that we're looking at it from, well, we want to make a direct correlation of learning to business performance, and no way can we do that. I mean, books have been written about either trying to do that, and then others say don't paint yourself in a corner to try to correlate directly to business results. And I defer to the latter, because if you try, learning is such an ambiguous, nebulous activity that you can't really say, if I teach Ajay or Don this skill, that it will actually create better results in the organization. We can't make that correlation directly. We can make it indirectly, but we can't make it directly. For example, you were saying IT, Rick. You invest in a computer system and it might increase efficiency, and there may be some direct correlation there. In learning, it's a lot more difficult to do. And so we mustn't forget that we are not an investment, first of all, and we're not a profit center. We're never intended to be a profit center, but we're meant to be a cost center, and that's how they account for it within the organization. And by the way, that's not a bad thing. I want to reiterate that. When I say cost, it's really not a bad thing, and I don't know how else to communicate that to our colleagues.
And in a lot of companies, I'll argue with you on this one. They are actually profit centers. In vendor environments, in call center environments, the training can make a huge difference between productivity and lack of productivity. So that's, and also, like, for example, in vendor environments where you're selling software or hardware, whatever you're selling, any products where you do training for those products and people pay for it, now you've got a profit center going on. But that's a different kind of from the regular corporate environment. But we work a lot with call centers, and boy, the training can make a huge difference.
Okay, let's, Rick, I agree with you to a certain extent. Let's take the vendor environment. I agree with you. I mean, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, there are companies out there like GE, for example. They do what they call change management processes very well. They do integration of organizations very well. And what they've done, they don't make this public, but they actually outsource some of their leading managers in change management to train other companies on how to do change management or how to do integration. And that has become a profit center for them internally. That said, that's more of the exception than the norm. When it comes to vendor, that's their intent to make profit off the training.
Sure.
That's no argument for me there. But internally, let's talk the call center aspect that you mentioned earlier. Yes, we teach people, or we instruct people how to answer a call, how to simplify things, and there could be some elements of correlation. But I'm sure you would agree with me, Rick. There's many other factors that affect the call center call and the interaction with the individual or a customer.
Oh, absolutely, and it depends on the quality and level of the training too.
Yeah. Yeah. So learning, and while I would love to give learning its due credit to say, hey, you get full credit of making this business correlation and you made a profit or you made efficiencies or whatever the case may be, at the end of the day, if we do that, then we have to be able to accept fault when our learning is not making an impact. And that's the challenge. Because learning is one of these ambiguous let me give you another example in business. For years, not necessarily before IT, but before IT became so sophisticated to track, how many people visit a website, where they came from, and so forth. Prior to that, marketing was one of these vague concepts that we would put millions of dollars in marketing, but we could not really correlate if that marketing had any impact. For example, we just watched the Super Bowl. I know there's a lot of Super Bowl fans watching me right now, so I hopefully take that as a privilege. But they've spent $4 million for a 30-second ad. There's no way that any one of those companies can actually track whether those ads had a real tangible impact or direct correlation to the sales. Yes, people can jump to the conclusion and make an implicit conclusion that there was a jump in sales or a jump in recognition, but in reality, we can't say exactly that $4 million had any benefit. in the long term, we can say that it created awareness, it created some conversation, it created some, increased sales over time. But in reality, you can't make a direct correlation just for those Super Bowl ads. Mm-hmm. And it's the same thing for learning. So if it's applicable to something like marketing, where you spend millions and tens of millions of dollars doing, why do we think we can make a direct correlation for something that's so ambiguous like marketing for learning?
Right. Now, Ajay, interesting point, because if you look at who gets laid off in corporations first, there's two groups, and you mentioned both of them, marketing and training. Yeah. They're the first two to go, and it's interesting because they both have, I would say, important roles within a company, but possibly not appreciated roles. Marketing obviously does more to the outward impact, but many companies have more marketing people than they need, and when they cut, it's always the marketing people. Sales gets cut sometimes, but I tell you, marketing and training are the two largest ones we've ever seen, always getting cut. And again, they become bottom line. Well, do we need all these many people? No, so they do the cuts. And what do you attribute?
It's an inverse relationship that doesn't get paid attention to.
Right, right.
Yeah, to me, that's a relatively simple answer. Most companies that I've had the privilege and pleasure of working with tend to invest when there's downtimes in training and even marketing. And those are the more what I call the progressive organization. So, and I know Don knows that I've done some work with Apple in the past. They're one of those companies that tend to invest further in their training and development. Even when they have slow times, they actually invest either a consistent amount or more. I know companies like Google, for example, they see themselves as a learning organization because they do see that they have to have consistent investment in training and development, not just periodic and when we need it. And so there's a different mindset and philosophy in these companies when you look at them. General Electric the same way. I just don't want to name high-tech companies, but the old school or the traditional companies like General Electric and Procter & Gamble, the ones that are leaders in their markets, tend to look at learning within the organization not as a periodic or one-time event or almost a reactive solution. They look at it as a proactive partnership, continuous evolving process within the organization, because they see it as an integrated component, not sort of an afterthought. Hey, oh my God, we just hired some people, we need to train them. It's more like, how do we keep these skill set moving forward? And if you look at these companies, there probably are some layoffs from time to time. Nothing is perfect, but I can guarantee you, on the average, they probably invest more in people, knowledge development, I would say, as a global context, rather than some companies who don't, the ones who are sort of lagging behind the marketplace and struggling to keep up. And so it's just an example of, I always like to jokingly say, name the top 5 market leaders, and people will always, name the big names like the Googles and the Apples and the GEs and that kind of stuff. And I say, well, if you can name them on one or two hands, that means they're doing something right to maintain that market leadership. Sure. And it's more than just putting out great product; it's actually fostering great people within the organization.
Typing in two windows here. The conversation in the chat pod is that organizations know that they can't not do learning, but often, even if we know how to articulate the value, how this affects the bottom line, or that it gets cut anyway. So it's the dance of how do we raise our visibility in a way that the business leaders really get the correlation, and that's the struggle I've had in my entire career.
It's interesting, John. We've had this conversation many times on the show, and I've argued the point that as a learning professional, if you don't understand the vertical you're in or whatever business you're in, you lose a lot of the importance of what they're looking for. Now, I know a lot of training people who are excellent. They know the business as well as anybody within the company. They never get laid off. They do very well. They're actually involved in everything up front. And I know other ones who are totally uninvolved in the business, have no idea what the business does, and they don't last long. It's just an interesting, companies want people who know what they do.
Well, Rick and Donna, let me answer that, because I think it's relatively more simple than learning professionals want to make it out to be. Rick, to your point, first of all, they understand the business, and that's very important. It's not the true learning professionals in some of these organizations understand what the organization is not only about, but what they do and where they want to go.
Sure.
And these are very important elements. Now, and I hate to be a plug here, I hope you don't mind, but in our recent book, The Trainer's Balanced Scorecard, we speak to that. Most organizations have a what we call a performance management framework. I would say the ones who are successful all have what we call a performance management framework. And a performance management framework are things like a balanced scorecard, which is the sort of the granddaddy of about performance frameworks. But they're all about the same. And so believe it or not, the revolution that came about in the balanced scorecard was they put in the original authors, Robert Kaplan and David Norton, back at KPMG and Harvard, actually put in learning and growth, or what they call learning and performance now, within the performance framework of the organization. And there's been a famous speech by Dr. Robert Kaplan about this to a group of senior level executives a number of years ago, saying that all of you people, you C-level, what we call C-suite or CEOs and CFOs and all these kind of people, understand what we're talking about when we talk about finance and internal processes and customers. But you thought we were absolutely nuts, and I'm paraphrasing here, by the way, but you thought you were absolutely crazy when we put in something called learning and performance within the performance framework. And what they're actually communicating to the group was, hey, the knowledge is going to be your competitive advantage and not the products. The products are going to be the results of what your people do well. Apple has shown that actually exceptionally well in the last 10, 15 years. But at the end of the day, what I say is that it's actually relatively simple to get connected to business rather than sit and be a learning department that waits for requests. And I'm simplifying this, and I don't mean to oversimplify it, but rather than sit back and be reactive, what I tell learning departments is, why don't you go out and learn about the business? Why don't you go out to the other business units and be proactive? Why don't you become a partner in the business and understand what they're doing? And don't start making up your own performance metrics or where you want to go. Understand where these business units have to go. And then understand and then use your learning skill to identify that. So do a needs assessment, do a skills assessment, where the gaps are, and say to them, where do you need to go? How can we help your people become better? Mm-hmm. And then we'll partner in your metrics and achieve those goals. Because simply put, Rick, and Don, at the end of the day, it's not about learning. Learning is what we call an enabling business unit. It's not a primary business unit. It actually connects to every part of the organization. And we can't see ourselves as a primary business unit. That implies it's an investment or a profit. We're a cost, and we enable others to do better. And that's something that's the way we have to do it. And by the way, the solutions are in front of all my colleagues. If they look at their performance frameworks, they will see the metrics that the units they want to partner with, they have to achieve and be accountable for. Sorry.
Thinking about rechartering your work and your mission as a learning center is important.
Sorry, Don, can you repeat that?
Yeah, I said, so choosing to recharter, if that's the word, or rebuild your mission and brand as an internal learning team, or even if you're just a single person in that role, getting out into the business, as you suggest, isn't always as easy as it sounds, but it is vital to your success.
Yeah, and I understand there's politics and barriers within organizations, but at the end of the day, you're not going to add any value to the organization. That's what the cost centers of organizations are about. They're not about making profit. They're about adding value to the organization and contributing to the objectives that they need to achieve. And so a number of years ago, I did some work with L'Oreal here in Montreal. And what was impressive to me, this is about 10 years ago, what was impressive to me, they had a performance management framework, but this is very difficult to do and a challenge for most companies. They communicated and you spoke about mission, Don, just a second ago. The mission is the ultimate objective of the organization. And when we break down the mission to its smaller components that everyone in the organization understands what they need to do, then we have understanding of the performance metrics they need to achieve, and then we know how learning performance can connect into those performance metrics and help them make it happen. Now, at L'Oreal, what they did is not only they communicate down to each department or each business unit within the organization, but in their administrative group, which I was working with, they communicated what we call personal scorecards to each employee. So they basically said to the employees, says, we want to keep you. What are your objectives, professional objectives, and what are our business objectives, and how do we correlate this to? And we're going to foster you to not only meet your own professional objectives, but then you're going to move up in the organization and build that performance. So the granularity is what we call it, that goes down to understanding all of the performance components. If you measure the connections all the way up into the organization, you start seeing the connections all the way up to the mission. And I hate to say this, but there's only a handful of companies in the world that do this actually very well. And again, that's where learning actually is within an integrated component, not an afterthought within the organization. I'm sorry to get so passionate about this, but it's something that I really feel strongly about.
Now, Ajay, when we talk about performance metrics, let's go into analytics a little bit.
Yeah.
People spend fortunes on learning management systems, and pretty much all they get out of it is launch course, end course. Right? and you just shake your head and go, now, what was the purpose of all that? And I've seen very few. I've seen some, and we've helped some, but that don't do anything with the LMS other than launch, end. They have loose curriculums, and they think they've acquired something or they've reached something, but the LMS is this out of useless. There's a lot of analytics that could be gotten from the training and from the performance that people are doing, and maybe follow-ups from an HR perspective or performance perspective. Where do you think the gap is there between the LMS and the actual performance?
I'm going to share a live example that we actually did, and the reason I speak a lot about Apple is that we worked with them for 5 years into a testing process and what we call an employee testing process, and this is for the Apple Care group. So answering your question on analytics, Rick, is this. What they tried to do is they were a Kirkpatrick house, so meaning that they would follow level 1 to level 4 as far as the Kirkpatrick. Now, backing up a step, when we talk about analytics, it starts with the leader. So Steve Jobs says we want to be number 1 in customer service. This is about 10 years ago, and that was their objective. So Apple Care was under the gun of how do we become number 1 in customer service, and so they did a reporting system in their testing system. They had an LMS, but they had a detailed reporting system about the performance of each Apple Care employee. And we implemented a testing system into their environment where what Apple would do is they would run what we call quizzes, tests, and exams. And the employees, 8,000 employees worldwide, would actually take these quizzes, tests, and exams continuously. What that did for the Apple Learning Group, the Apple Care Learning Group, was it would provide an understanding of where the weaknesses were within the Apple Care people. So let me just share a number with you. We were running, I think, about 125 to 150,000 quote-unquote tests for 8,000 employees per month. And these analytics were coming back to the learning group, and they would be able to microscopically look at the analytics and say, okay, so say Rick is on the Apple Care group for iPhones, and suddenly he's being tested or quizzed, but he seems to have a weakness to understand how the iPhone integrates with the MacBook. And so now, rather than send Rick into more training and waste money and waste his time doing that, let's see if maybe we can coach Rick or mentor him or throw him a sort of a real-time e-learning course to show the proper integration. And so this we call what the way Apple used it was the analytics was a very microscopic objective. So going back to the original question, Rick, is you have to know what you're trying to improve specifically to be able to understand what type of analytics need to be used. Now, every LMS probably has this capability, but I don't think it's probably used to the extent that it should be. And I think maybe SCORM and all these, I'm no expert in these areas, by the way, but are not being able to report it properly. I know some of our colleagues, Don, are doing this Experience API stuff, which it's really beyond my pay scale. But what I understand is that it really provides this detailed analytics within the LMS to understand how learning is actually impacting that skill set. But that's basically in a nutshell, understanding what is to be accomplished and then focusing analytics around that so you know where your learning is going to take place.
Okay.
It's the meaning of learner-centric learning, right? So
Essentially,
I think that,
yes.
I think that it's not just the future, it's the present. We're chatting about it in the social stream, and my feeling is large organizations are going to continue to be slow to adopt. But Anthony's reminding me that he has 20 million students, and they're doing XAPIs. So the future is here. I think that is the way we do it. We teach them at the point of need what they need to learn. And teaching, coaching, mentoring, whatever language you want to put around it, but that we have a framework for providing what they need in the moment is huge.
Yeah, I think we're learning as we mature as a learning profession, we're learning that we can't teach or instruct and develop all skills. We used to do that 20, 30, 40 years ago. What we're trying to do now is almost, terms being tossed around like real time, this kind of stuff. What we're really saying is that let's just focus the learning where it needs to be. So what is the learning that needs to be focused on, and where do we need to focus it on, and how do we need to focus it on? And if we do that, at the end of the day, business leaders do not want downtime. They do not want people to waste their time. And so we have to become almost like just-in-time inventory. We have to be there when they need it, how they need it, and then apply it. Now, that is very feasible if you have a good, strong learning strategy in the back that ties into the business strategy, and then you do it. Then you do this real-time kind of stuff. The problem with learning is that most of learning professionals, and I say this with all love and respect, and I know I'm probably going to get a lot of flack from my colleagues in this thing,
We'll flog
but
you later.
we'll flog me later, but we look for the quick. Everybody comes to see me at conferences when I speak and say, give me the answer. And I'm like, every environment is unique in business, and there's no one quick answer. And if you're looking for a quick answer, it's not going to happen. Your business leaders need to see that you are well integrated. And I can sit here and try to speak about examples of solutions, but the examples I give will not necessarily work in your environment. So sit back and understand your business and understand the performance objectives of your business partners, the ones that are actually making the money for the company, and then tie in the need. And then you'll see you build a strong learning strategy. You'll align with performance metrics that are important to the organization, and then you'll be able to focus your learning. And by the way, you do all those things. I'm making it, again, simplifying it. I don't mean to oversimplify it, but you do those things, and then maybe they'll invite you for that proverbial seat at the table where you sit and help make decisions. Until then, don't go to say I want to sit at the table and then start learning gibberish to them.
Right. However, when somebody asks you, give me the answer, tell them this. This will always get you a higher rate. Just say the answer. Look to the west. and be silent after that. They'll hire you forever after that one. But
I will do that. And Don, I'm sure I'm getting a lot of flack on the chat rooms right now.
We're all supporting you. We're all supporting you. Just in the last couple minutes that we have, I think that my most recent sets of conversation with learning professionals is letting them know that they're empowered to say no when some strange request comes to them to build a course or learning that doesn't tie to the business, and it almost seems like it's fluff. I think that we're so happy somebody asks us. We don't always know that saying no or asking the question, is this what the business really needs? Is the business culture going to benefit from this, whatever language? I think that we need to ask better questions and not be afraid to do so.
Also, another issue is a lot of learning professionals are kind of wannabe academics. That doesn't fly in a business. And as a result, they don't communicate the same language. They're not aligned to the same goals. And of course, the learning departments usually don't do that well when that happens. And those are just some of the small issues of learning. There's a lot of things that the learning departments want that, frankly, companies don't care about.
Rick and Don, the let me just share this. I'm not sure why learning and performance are so scared to be accountable. We live in an age that we talk about knowledge. We used to be in an industrial age. Now we're in what we call so-called, I mean, I don't know what the term is today, but a knowledge age, an information age, whatever you want to call it. All companies know, and business leaders from the CEO down know that their advantage is through their knowledge. And that implies one thing. We're in the industrial age. It was the finance department that was, and the marketing departments that were in the lead or leading the organization. Today, when we talk about knowledge age, it now becomes a responsibility of learning and development, or training and development, to accept that role, embrace it, and move forward. And I use this anecdote in my sessions. I always say, we're the spoiled child of business. 20 years ago, 30 years ago, business leaders didn't really care about us, but it was like a necessary evil. So what they did is they would back up a truck, dump a bunch of money in our department, and sort of run away and say, do what you do in your little magic black ball, and then we'll be happy. And then, of course, you get laid off, as you alluded to earlier, Rick, when we don't need you. But today, it's like we're backing up the truck, but when we back up the truck, we want to see you do something with this money.
Right.
We want you to prove to us that you can do something with this money, and that's not meant to be scary. That meant I would encourage learning professionals to embrace that and not run away and say, yes, I can be that leader that I want to be in the organization. I'm going to help you lead this organization to success. And that's what business leaders want to say. The first myth is that people believe that the CEO does not see importance in learning. That is false. A wise CEO or CFO will see that, hey, learning is the key to our success. And that's what we need to embrace.
Well, there is another thing that's scaring a lot of companies, and that is that the workforce is substantially less qualified, less capable, and less interested in working than they were maybe 20 years ago. And that is another major issue. This is a learning issue that starts all the way from elementary school through college, where I call colleges puppy mills. We put out a lot of people without any expertise in anything. And it's really a shame, and it depends on what college and everything else, but that's another thing that the companies have to deal with a workforce that doesn't care that much about the work.
Yeah, and when you look worldwide, I'm not sure if that applies to U.S. only or probably some other countries. I mean, if you look at Europe, there are some countries there that really are, promoting or focusing students at different grade levels into the right areas.
Right.
But I mean, I'm sorry, Rick, that's a bit above my pay scale. But you're right. There's a shortage skills gap in certain industries, in certain areas, and maybe in certain countries. But at the end of the day, our role is to make sure that we fill those skills gap internally of to what the organization
Right.
needs to meet and foster that. Look at Google, for example. I love using Google because I tell people, you think Google is successful just because they're Google, or is it because they know the strength of what skills they need within an organization, what knowledge they need to focus upon in an organization to be successful? And Google will not be Google if they didn't do that. And if they stop doing any type of learning development or filling the skills gap, as you mentioned earlier, Rick, then they would just go bankrupt tomorrow. Mm-hmm. And so that's the thing. We have to embrace that we are now the champions of helping our organization succeed, and that means that we embrace the holy grail of skill sets. Mm-hmm. How do we transfer that learning, and what skills we're going to transfer? And again, simply put, if people want to start easy, just look at some simple performance metrics from other business units and try to help them achieve it. You do one or two of those things in your organizations, and you will look like a hero.
Yep. And can you tell us again what the name of your book was?
It's the Trainer's Balance Scorecard, a complete an organizational resource for linking learning to organizational strategy.
That's great.
And it's available on Amazon and Wiley. So the short name would be the Trainer's Balance Scorecard. It's been endorsed by Dr. David Norton, the founder of the Balance Scorecard. And also we have other books. I'm going to be speaking at Learning Solutions coming up in March on building business skills for training professionals. So if anybody wants to join that, there's a one-day certification workshop at LSCon. And I'll be speaking also about the basically the ROI lie, why you should not be using return on investment for training and development at AATD in May. So join me.
Oh, Jack Phillips will be in your room.
Yeah, let's not go there, Don.
Or he
Well,
might send
Ajay,
one of
it's a-
his minions, but he'll definitely be there. But I'm a huge supporter of that. Huge.
Well, Ajay, it's been a pleasure, and I know you've got a hard. I think we're really past your hard deadline. So
Yes.
Oh man, when you're having fun, Rick and Don,
I know,
seriously,
I know.
you really
We
made it
sometimes go
really
long.
fun.
We'd love to have you back on, though.
Yeah.
I would love to come on. Honestly, if you want me, I'd be here in a minute.
Sounds great.
Okay,
Appreciate it.
Thank you, guys.
And
Thanks,
Ajay,
Ajay.
again, and people can see you at Learning Solutions. You said you were also at another show coming up.
At ATD. Ice.
ATD in May.
Great, at the Ice Show.
And there's a bunch. I write for ATD Links. I'm a field editor. Plus, I'm writing for Training Magazine on the last word. There's an article that you may enjoy called "Let's Get Naked" with Training Magazine. So I suggest you go look at it if you want to know why you should get naked when you learn.
That's true.
Note to self: how you Google that at
Yes.
work could affect your performance.
Don, I always get naked when I learn, and read the article to learn more. So
Sounds good.
Well, thank you so much for being here today.
And
thank you very much, guys.
And we will see you next time. And if you're watching the show, please subscribe. There are buttons all over the place for you to subscribe. Press them. If you don't, something bad might happen. No, seriously. We'd love to have you subscribe. Give us your feedback. The shows will be on Vimeo, and they're going to be on YouTube imminently again. So we're going to have them all over the place. Have a good one, everyone. We'll see you next week. Take care. Bye-bye.